Welcome to the Cyber Center for Biblical Studies. Hi, my name is Herb Bateman. Today we want to review a commentary in the NIV Application Commentary series. This is a commentary on the book of Esther written by Karen Jobes. Today we have with us Lee Compson, senior pastor of the Milford First Brethren Church in Milford, Indiana. Lee, welcome.
Thanks, Herb. It's good to be here.
All right. Well, I am under the delusion that we are, or that you are, preaching through the book of Esther, and that you have found this commentary to be somewhat helpful. So tell me about the commentary, and how does she work her way through the book of Esther?
Sure. The NIV Application Commentary is a pretty popular commentary series that was produced, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s. And the commentary itself is a fairly standard commentary as far as its approach. It talks about the introductory issues at the beginning. But what makes this commentary unique, and really this entire series unique, is its focus on bridging the gap between the Old Testament world, the world of Esther, and our day and age today in 2017, United States of America. And it takes that approach in each chapter. After covering the introductory issues and the textual historical issues, it gets into just each section, major section of the book, and covers them for basically to help pastors understand the book and preach it and teach it and then apply it.
Okay. How does it compare to other commentaries? I think you've already hit on this, but generally when I think about commentaries, I think of critical commentaries that are very technical, a lot of grammar in Hebrew. I think of expositional commentaries that work you through the text, but they're going to major on the majors, and then devotional type commentaries, a commentary that maybe be a sermon that has been put into print, like Ironside or the Warren Wiersbe series. Where does this particular NIV application commentary fit in?
Sure. I think it's somewhere in the middle, that second option. It will delve into, at appropriate points, some of the text critical issues, some of the grammatical or historical issues, the technical parts of interpreting and translating and understanding Esther. But it really wants to place a large emphasis on the application. And so each chapter each chapter has three sections: the original meaning, where it gets into the verse by verse issues and what's going on. Then it'll have a section on bridging context, which is mostly, okay, what are some issues that may not make sense to our current audience, and what are some connecting points that we can make as a pastor or teacher or even just a student of the Word? What are some connecting points? And then the final section is called Contemporary Significance, which attempts to draw out direct application and maybe two or three issues that are relevant today that go back to the kind of original central truths and themes of the passage it's covering. So I guess I should note that given that this commentary is about 16, 17 years old, some of the contemporary things may not resonate as sharply as they did in 1999, 2000, but it's still pretty easy. The commentary itself allows us to connect the dots even a few years later after the commentary has been written. I find it really helpful and unique in that way in comparison to other commentaries where it's hoping to drive you to application and relevancy.
If you were to think of something, well, let me backtrack because I do want to make sure that the strength of the commentary comes through. And I think you've already noted that. But why don't you once again maybe restate, what do you think is the strongest suit of this commentary?
Sure. And even with relation to Esther, because Esther is a unique book in the canon in many ways. So this commentary is strong, obviously, as I've mentioned, in the application and relevance for today. But even with the book of Esther, I think it takes a realistic approach to the original story. Many people know the story of Esther, but probably know a sugar-coated version of it that they learned in Sunday school when they were kids or something like that. And when you actually study the book as it was written, you get a pretty different picture and probably will come to a different understanding of what actually happened, what was going on, what are some of the issues. And so she does a great job of ignoring some of the sugar-coated over-spiritualization of the characters and the elements and the events of the story, and really hitting on what was going on, but getting to the truth of what was God doing in this story. Because Esther's a book that doesn't mention God. There's no comment or focus on the law or even prayer. There seems to be a detachment from your typical Old Testament religious life that you observe going on, but she's able to say, okay, why is that, and why is it pertinent, and how can we still see God's fingerprints all over this story? Another strength of this book is the fact, and one of the reasons I chose it and bought the commentary myself was, I mean, she's bringing a female perspective as a biblical scholar. The story of Esther is she's a strong woman character, and so when I was looking for commentaries and resources, this one jumped out at me because she is a female biblical scholar and can probably bring some understanding to it that I, as a male, or many other male commentaries can't really hit the same I guess insight. So that was another reason that this commentary appealed to me.
So let me piggyback on that.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about her comments and comments made by others that are writing on this that are from a male perspective, was there anything that stood out in your mind that I wouldn't have seen this had I not used Karen Job's commentary versus a commentary written by men in particular? I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
There aren't any major things yet, major aha moments that I've discovered yet. But one thing that I did really appreciate was her approach to kind of the maybe a feminist interpretation of Esther.
Okay.
She is very fair in her approach in the biblical interpretation. I feel very comfortable with her conclusions and things like that. But she also does confront a more liberal feminist interpretation that really centers around the book of Esther and maybe some other books too. But Esther is kind of a magnet towards kind of a feminist theology. And there are a lot of critics, especially from maybe a uber feminist world, that maybe take shots at Esther or criticize it unfairly. And she's able to address those, give answers and solutions to maybe some of the questions that perspective is bringing to Esther. And I think she does a great job defending a evangelical interpretation of Esther. But again, she's not going as far as maybe some have historically, and again, over spiritualizing the characters and the events with Esther and Mordecai and things like that. So I find her approach to be very valuable, and that's even keeled. It's not going to go off the deep end on either from either side.
Okay. Was there something you wish she had covered that you thought may have been lacking?
There are some points and details I found in other commentaries that I didn't necessarily find in hers, and I'm still. I probably need to broaden my resource pool to determine whether or not this is a weakness, or maybe it's just some of these details aren't worth noting. Things like Haman is a main character in Esther, obviously, and he's called an Agagite. And almost every commentator will make a connection to the Old Testament enemy of Israel, the Amalekites, and they had a king named Agag. And so many people will draw the conclusion, this is an allusion to Agag, that king, and might have been a descendant. But there was one detail I found in a couple commentaries that mentioned Agag not only was the name of a king, but it also might have been a place in Persia. And so that was kind of, and some of the commentaries kind of wrestle and present those as options. Hers didn't really. And again, this probably isn't going to come through a lot in my sermons or preaching and teaching, but just to understand it as one of those textual issues, at least on that point, I didn't find a full, maybe a full analysis of that. She kind of presented her conclusion, her approach, and went from there. That was just, I guess, one small. There may be a couple little things like that. There's nothing I've seen that I've been really disappointed in, though. Nothing major.
So sometimes with commentaries, there are things that you need to know to interpret.
Sure. Yep.
And then there's other things that's nice to know, but it may not necessarily affect the interpretation. And Karen seems to focus on the things that you really need to know in order to teach and preach this text.
Exactly.
Okay, very good. What other commentators have you found to be helpful when you think about your study and approaching this book? Is there one or two that you might include as a recommendation with this one?
Yes, there would be a couple. As I've looked at a handful of commentaries on Esther, a lot of them cite some older ones, which are interesting that I myself haven't gotten the original source, but I believe the one widely respected analysis of Esther is by Cary Moore, I believe is his name. This is from maybe 80 years ago, and it's one of those scholarly, textual, critical commentaries that is one of the standards of Esther that a lot of these other commentaries are citing. John Whitcomb has a small one I've picked up somewhere that is really valuable, and I find is cited in other sources. The former Grace professor and scholar. The interesting thing is there's not the wealth of resources for the book of Esther that you might find in a lot of other books. I know some Christian camps, they struggle with the book of Esther, quite frankly, because there aren't easy connections to make with Christ, or they're intimidated by some of the historical and textual issues. So there is probably a need for more good commentaries on the book of Esther, quite frankly.
Okay. Well, Lee, thank you so much for sharing with us this commentary from the NIV Application Commentary series on the book of Esther by Karen Jobe, and thank you for joining us. And I trust you might consider preaching the book of Esther. It's a beautiful book, and of course, really demonstrating God's sovereignty and protection of his people. But in the meantime, I trust that you will walk with our King and be a blessing to all those that you come in contact with. Thank you.